Did you like the cottage I gave you, Mom? I looked up from my chipped mug. The steam from my tea curled in the cold air between us, vanishing like breath on a winter window. I blinked. What cottage? I asked quietly. Across the table, my son Ryan froze, fork in hand. That smile, the one I hadn't seen since he was 13, and still left me sticky notes that said, I love you. Mom started to slide from his face. The one on Cypress Key, he said slowly. I bought it for you last year. Remember Ocean View? All on one level, so you wouldn't have to worry about stairs after your knee surgery. I couldn't move. The tiny patio where we sat had once been part of a sunroom, but the glass had cracked in too many places, so I'd taken the panels down and turned it into an open space. I liked the breeze, even if the draft snuck in at night. My folding chair creaked beneath me. The metal table between us had rust stains I couldn't scrub out anymore. Ryan, I said I've been living in this duplex for 7 years. Same street. Same landlord who forgets the heater exists every December. I've never seen a cottage. Never heard of one. For a moment, I thought he might laugh. Say something like, "You're joking," or "Check your mailbox." But he didn't. He looked at Claire, his wife seated beside him, elegantly coiled in a cashmere shawl, the color of old pearls. Her hair was pinned, her expression unreadable. She was always unreadable. Didn't we get confirmation that everything went through? Ryan asked, her brows pulling together. Claire didn't answer at first, her fingers perfectly manicured in a pale mauve, wrapped around her wine glass a little too tightly. I remember the paperwork, she said, tone even. I worked with the realtor. Maybe the welcome packet got lost in the mail. That phrase, lost in the mail, landed like a stone in my stomach. For the past year, I'd been collecting coupons like currency, rinsing Ziploc bags to reuse them, deciding between heat or groceries more often than I'd ever admit to anyone. My left knee throbbed at night. I'd had to sell my engagement ring to pay for my dental bridge after the second molar cracked. And this woman who wore Hermes and drank imported French tea was suggesting that my house, my supposed home, simply got lost in the mail. I looked back at Ryan. He was frowning now, swiping through his phone. I've been sending $2,000 a month to cover the HOA and utilities, he said. The deed was signed in your name. Claire helped me manage the setup while I was traveling for work. Claire again. Claire, who always smiled too widely and called me Ma in a tone that made the word sound like an obligation. I pushed back from the table. Ryan, I've been living off of powdered soup and peanut butter crackers for 6 months. I had to ask Cheryl at the church pantry for help with my prescriptions in February. I haven't seen or touched a dime. He stopped scrolling. What he said softly. And I knew in that pause that this wasn't a joke. This wasn't some elaborate miscommunication. Ryan genuinely thought I'd been taken care of. Claire's phone buzzed. She rose, smoothing her sweater. Excuse me, she said lightly. I have to confirm a dinner reservation. I watched her walk inside, perfectly composed, perfectly distant, and remembered something I hadn't thought about in months. Last Christmas, Claire had gifted me a candle set and said, "It's from both of us," before Ryan could open his mouth. When I thanked her, she said, "We just want you to be comfortable in your new space." I thought she meant emotionally. Now I realized she'd been covering something. Ryan stood suddenly alert, typing rapidly on his phone. "I'm calling Deborah, my paralegal. She processed the deed, transfer the maintenance accounts. All of it." My heart thumped unevenly. Not from hope, from dread. I looked around the patio, at the wind chimes I'd strung from old spoons, the broken planter I couldn't afford to replace, the squeaky screen door I'd learned to close with a gentle lift so it wouldn't fall off the hinge. This place had never been meant to be permanent, but it was what I had, what I'd learned to survive in. Ryan turned to me. She said the deed was recorded, taxes paid, payments were wired to the account listed as yours. Which account? I asked slowly. He showed me the last 4 digits, 3207. I shook my head. Mine ended in 7711. The realization hit him like a slap. I saw it, a flicker of panic. Claire helped set up the routing info. He said more to himself than to me. She said she confirmed it with you. I was already rising from my seat. She never asked me anything I said. Not once. And if there's a house in my name that I've never seen, then someone has been living in it. And it's not me. Inside, I could hear Claire's voice. Low, sharp. A pause. Then a strained laugh. And suddenly, everything started to fall into place. The time she casually mentioned you must love being close to the water when I hadn't been near a beach in 2 years. The packages that arrived with no return address, a yoga mat scented diffusers, things I never ordered but assumed were sent in error. The calls I didn't receive, the mail that never came. Ryan dropped his phone onto the table. She said the house would be a surprise, he said. Said you didn't want the fuss. I turned and looked him square in the eyes. You thought I didn't want to know you bought me a home? No, he whispered. I thought you were already living in it. Ryan's lips moved, but no sound came out. I watched him, my boy now 36, a partner at a law firm whose name was printed in gold on business cards and conference banners, suddenly shrink into someone I hadn't seen in decades. The little boy who once stood in our backyard in Tennessee, holding a glue-covered macaroni card in his sticky hands and whispering, "When I grow up, Mom, I'm going to buy you a house with a garden and birds, and you'll never have to work again." That boy had meant it. And for a moment I saw him again, lost, betrayed, blindsided, not just by what was stolen, but by who had done the stealing. I trusted her, he said quietly. I thought she loved you too. My chest ached, and maybe that was the hardest part. For 2 years I'd questioned myself, told myself Claire just wasn't expressive, that not every daughter-in-law needed to bake pies or send cards. That maybe I was expecting too much from someone who came from a different background, wealth, boarding school summers in Provence. But now looking back, I remembered things that made more sense in this new sickening light. How Claire once insisted on picking me up for a spa day she'd gifted me and canceled 30 minutes before pickup. How she smiled when I mentioned my landlord raising rent, saying, "Well, that's the market, isn't it?" How she cut me off once mid-sentence with, "You should learn to relax, Ma. You're too frugal." Frugal. As if making soup from leftover bones was a personality flaw. "Ryan," I said, voice steady now, "I think we both need to stop pretending this was a misunderstanding." He nodded slowly. A grim acceptance settled over him. "Do you want to see it?" he asked. The cottage. I hesitated. I didn't know if I was ready to look upon something that was meant for me, but had been occupied, possibly violated by someone who smiled at my face and stole behind my back. "Not yet," I said. "But I need to know who's been living there. And how long." He looked toward the hallway Claire had disappeared into. I could hear her pacing now. Muffled words. No more fake reservations. She always said she wanted to help manage the details, Ryan muttered. I thought she was being supportive. I stood, my knees stiff but firm beneath me. No, honey. She was managing something all right, but not for me, for herself. The wind stirred the chimes again, a low metallic tinkle that echoed the tension in my chest. I turned to gather our mugs, my hands steady now. Tomorrow I thought we'd pull the papers, trace every wire transfer, every account, every document that bore my name but never reached my hands. But tonight I was done being blind, done being polite, done believing that silence was peace. "Ryan," I said, not turning back. "I think it's time we asked Claire the question she's been hoping we'd never ask." He looked up. "Which question?" "The one that starts with, 'Where's my house?'" And just like that, the cracks beneath everything we thought was solid began to split slowly, quietly, but irrevocably. The woman who had spent 2 years calling me Ma with that flat practice smile was about to find out who I was. Claire didn't come out of the hallway for the next 30 minutes. She said she had a call with the caterer, but I could hear the pacing, the clipped syllables. The door to Ryan's old bedroom clicked shut, Not long after that was always her move retreat behind closed doors and wait for storms to pass. But this wasn't weather. This was math. This was 2 years of silence, 2 years of lies, 2 years of my son believing I was safe while I boiled pasta water twice to make broth and rinsed out Advil bottles, hoping one had fallen to the bottom. I sat down on the couch. Ryan was already back at the patio table laptop, open hands flying over the keyboard. Now and then he'd pause scroll and exhale through his nose in that way he always had when he was parsing through evidence in a case file. "There's something off," he said. "The deed's digital copy says it was signed by you, but this isn't your signature." I walked over. He turned the screen toward me, and there it was. My name, Margaret Lorraine Davis, scrawled at the bottom of a document dated 13 months ago. But the handwriting, it was wrong. Not so. Not like a child faking a sick note. But the M didn't loop the way mine did. And the G in Margaret, I always curved the tail. This one was sharp, mechanical. "That's not me," I said. "I never signed that." Ryan closed the screen slowly. His jaw tightened just a little. "Claire said she had the notary meet you at the medical rehab center. When I asked, she said you didn't want me flying in just for paperwork." I stared at him. "Ryan, after my surgery, I was bedridden for 3 weeks. I didn't leave the apartment except for therapy. No one came. No notary. No conversation." He looked stunned. Not because he didn't believe me, but because his mind was catching up to everything his heart didn't want to see. "You think she forged your signature?" I didn't answer. Because it wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. After Ryan left that night under the pretense of needing to walk Claire's dog, I didn't sleep. Instead, I pulled out the small box from the top of my linen closet, the one where I kept bills, receipts, notes, and all the quiet paper trails of surviving alone. I flipped through bank statements, noticing gaps I couldn't explain. In December, a $2,000 deposit I never received. In February, an insurance reimbursement that never came. The numbers didn't just hurt, they mocked me. I remembered how just 3 months ago, Claire had offered to handle my taxes, saying she knew someone who did great work for family. I'd been too tired to say no, too grateful someone even offered. Now I realized that the offer hadn't been helpful. It had been a hand reaching under the table, turning the wheel behind the curtain I was never supposed to look behind. The next morning I woke early. Not because I was rested, but because something in me had reawakened, something that hadn't stirred in years. Clarity. I brewed the cheap black coffee I always drank, bitter and oversteeped, and took it to the small breakfast table. The sun hadn't yet touched the kitchen tiles. I opened my notebook, the one with grocery lists and prayer requests, and tore out a clean page. At the top, I wrote, "What I know. Ryan bought a cottage. Money sent monthly. I received nothing. Claire is involved in all paperwork. The signature on the deed is fake. The routing number doesn't match mine. Claire handled my taxes. Claire intercepted communication." And beneath it, I wrote, "What I wouldn't do. Cry. Doubt myself. Protect someone who betrayed me." By noon, Ryan called. His voice was low, like he'd spent the night turning over stones he never wanted to see under. "Mom," he said. "Can I come over?" "You're always welcome," I said. But we both knew this wasn't a visit. This was business now. He arrived with a stack of folders, a USB drive, and a face that looked 5 years older than it had yesterday. "I need to show you something," he said. We sat down and he pulled up a screen, a wire transfer history from one of his business accounts. Claire's name showed up on 3 of them. One was labeled emergency loan, Margaret's knee, $1,800. Another supplemental care budget, Cypress property, $5,000. A third seasonal maintenance float, $3,500. "She told me all of this was for you," Ryan said. "But the deposits went to an account ending in 2234. "That's not mine," I said instantly. He already knew. He handed me a printed form from his bank. The account in question had been opened 2 weeks after my surgery. The mailing address, 349 Lambert Avenue, apartment 2D. I didn't even need to ask. That was Claire's friend's condo. the one she'd house sat last year. The one she said was convenient for work when Ryan was away on a case. She used it as a shadow address, I said, to make it look like I lived there. Ryan looked sick. I can't believe she'd go this far. I could. Because I remembered last summer the time Claire posted photos from a wellness retreat with ocean views and white linens. I had looked at that photo, her holding a glass of sangria on a cottage deck, and thought, funny that railing looks familiar. Now I knew why. She hadn't stolen just my money. She had stolen my place in her narrative. She lived my life, the one my son had built for me. And worse, she smiled while doing it. By evening, Ryan's hands were shaking. I need to ask her, he said. Face to face. You need to do more than that, I said calmly. You need to protect yourself. And me. Because the thing was, women like Claire didn't just lie. They prepared for the fallout. They spun alternate stories. They cast doubt before you even knew where to look. And I wasn't going to be her cautionary tale. That night, as I lay in bed, the fan above me whirring unevenly, I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the versions of myself that had existed quietly over the past 2 years. The mother who waited for calls that didn't come. The widow who pinched every dollar to survive. The woman who thought silence was safer than conflict. But there was another version of me now, the one who saw, who named what was happening, who refused to be erased. I wasn't going to play the role Claire had written for me. And whatever came next, confrontation, investigation, even court, I would walk into it with my head high. Because finally, I knew the truth. And the woman behind the curtain. She wasn't nearly as careful as she thought. I always believed if you looked long enough at any lie, the truth would start to bleed through the cracks. But sometimes it doesn't bleed. Sometimes it spills. That Monday, Ryan picked me up just before 10 a.m. He looked tired, but more composed, like he'd tucked away whatever part of himself was unraveling. I recognized the look. It was the same one I wore after his father passed. The mask you put on when falling apart is no longer a luxury you can afford. You ready? He asked. I nodded. Let's go find what she thought she buried. The bank building was glass and steel, all curves and corporate calm, the kind of place where no one ever raises their voice and betrayal is translated into spreadsheets. Ryan had called ahead. A private appointment. His name still carried weight, and when we stepped into the conference room, 2 associates and a branch manager were already waiting with folders stacked like bricks. We'll need proof of identification, the manager said politely, since the account in question was opened under your name. I slid my ID across the table without hesitation. Driver's license, Medicare card, even my old tax return. They began comparing signatures. Page by page, their expressions shifted, slightly at first, then fully. Mrs. Davis, the manager said slowly, your signature is different from the one on file here. The application for this account was notarized. However, he hesitated. The notary used is under investigation for prior misconduct. We believe the signature was likely forged. Ryan's hands clenched around his coffee cup. He said nothing, but the silence spoke plenty. Can I see the withdrawal history? I asked. He turned the screen toward me. I blinked. March $1,500 withdrawal ATM, Outer Banks, NC. April $2,000, Spa, Du Soleil billed under my name. May $1,200, Seaside Decor and Design. June $900, cash. Every month, cash luxury indulgence withdrawn under my name, while I rationed medication and counted quarters to buy dish soap. Did she sign for those transactions? Ryan asked. Many were PIN-based, but a few had receipts. Some are digital. We can request security footage archives. Ryan turned to me. Are you okay? He asked. I looked at him. My son, who had once tied his shoelaces in double knots because he feared they'd come undone, now facing the unraveling of his marriage in high-definition clarity. I'm not angry, I said, voice low. Not yet. I'm focused. And I was. Because anger is fleeting. But focus. That's how women like me survive. Back at my duplex, Ryan laid out the evidence on my kitchen table. Bank records, credit pulls, emails from his assistant Deborah confirming that Claire had consolidated communications so I wouldn't be bothered. Wouldn't be bothered I'd spent Christmas Eve alone burning scented candles because I couldn't afford the heater running overnight. And she didn't want me bothered. Ryan slid over a piece of paper. "This one stings the most," he said. "It's from the title company." It was a formal letter. Mrs. Claire Davis signed on behalf of Margaret Davis, citing power of attorney provided for post-surgical coordination. Enclosed are signed copies of authorization dated June 6th. I stared at the date. Ryan. That was the day I was under anesthesia. I had a catheter in. I couldn't speak, let alone sign a power of attorney. "I know," he said. "She forged that too." And with that, the truth stopped bleeding. It roared. That night, I didn't sleep again. But not from fear. From remembering. All the micro moments. The time she double-checked my mail. The way she offered to handle the pharmacy after my surgery. That time she asked to see my social security card to help sign me up for online medical access. Every small betrayal, each wrapped in faux concern. That's how women like Claire work, not with force, but with access. They don't break the door down. They find the spare key you didn't know you left under the mat. The next morning I made a call. Her name was Angela, a friend from church who used to work for the county clerk's office. A woman who had once shown me how to file a lien when a contractor walked off halfway through redoing my roof. She met me at the library cafe with a manila envelope and eyes full of curiosity, but she didn't voice it. "Margaret," she said, "I ran that title search you asked about. You're listed as the owner on record for the Cypress property. But," she tapped the paper, "you're also listed as receiving a $12,000 remodeling allowance from a firm called Claire and Company Interiors." "That's her company," I whispered. "She registered it under an LLC 3 months before the deed was signed." Angela's voice softened. "She funneled payments into her business using your name. Which means, depending on intent, we're not just talking civil fraud, we're talking felony-grade identity theft." My hands didn't tremble. Not anymore. Because now I wasn't confused. I wasn't wounded. I was armed. When Ryan arrived at sunset, I handed him the folder. He read in silence. "She used your name to approve business expenses. She used my name to build a life I was supposed to have," I corrected. He didn't argue. "She's not careful enough to cover everything I said. She's left threads. And if we pull, it's going to unravel. What do you want to do?" I paused. The question hung in the air. Not just about legal action, but about boundaries, justice, closure. First, I said I want to see the cottage. Now. It took 2 hours to reach Cypress Key. The roads grew darker as we drove the kind of winding, salt-swept highway that smelled of pine and brine. We didn't speak much. I just stared out the window, picturing what I might see: Claire's throw pillows, her mugs, her mother's photo on the mantel. When we pulled into the long drive, the porch light was on. A golden halo. A lie. The cottage was everything Ryan had described: wraparound deck, pale blue siding, magnolia trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. My breath caught. "She said you cried when you first saw it," Ryan murmured. I shook my head. "I am crying, but not for the reasons she told you." We stepped inside. She wasn't home, but her presence was everywhere. A pair of stilettos by the door. A silk robe was draped over the couch. A mug with the phrase "Manifest It" half filled with lipstick-stained tea. I walked through the kitchen slowly, my hand brushing across marble countertops. I'd never touched cabinets I'd never opened. Then I saw it. Pinned on the fridge was a note. "Pick up wine for Mom. She loves the porch swing." I stared at the words. "She brought her mother here," I whispered. "She made this her family place." "While you sat alone in a duplex in the dark," Ryan said, voice like gravel. I turned. "We'll press charges," I said. "But more than that, I want this undone. Every inch." He nodded. "It starts tomorrow." But something shifted in me as I stepped back onto the porch. I wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. I was reclaiming the space that was stolen, the love that had been rerouted, the trust that had been misused. I wasn't just confronting Claire. I was confronting every version of myself that stayed quiet when I should have spoken. The receipts didn't just prove a crime, they proved a pattern, and I was about to break it for good. The confrontation didn't happen at a dinner table. It didn't come with shouting or shattered plates or grand declarations like in the movies. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, gray, humid, and unbearably quiet in my tiny living room, with a cup of cold tea between us and a stack of receipts on the coffee table that neither of us could ignore anymore. Claire walked in without knocking, still dressed for brunch, silk blouse, pale heels, sunglasses pushed into her hair. As if none of this was happening. As if the world she built on forged documents and my stolen peace could be maintained with posture alone. "You asked to talk," she said. "So talk." I studied her. Her eyes were rimmed with the faintest shadow, not from crying, from watching the walls close in. A woman who knew her reflection wasn't holding together anymore. I didn't flinch. "Claire," I said, "where were you on June 6th last year?" She blinked. "Excuse me. That's the date the power of attorney was signed." "Allegedly." She tilted her head. "Still playing the game." "You're saying I wasn't there." "I'm saying I was under anesthesia with a heart monitor clipped to my chest and a nurse wiping drool from my chin." I picked up the paper from the table and laid it gently in front of her. "You signed this. On my behalf, using a power you never had." Silence. For a split second her expression faltered, a twitch in the corner of her lip. But then came the performance. "I was only trying to help." She said it so softly, like a confession wrapped in silk. "You were alone. Ryan was working 70 hours a week. I thought it would be easier if I coordinated everything." I didn't move, didn't even blink. "So you coordinated it by opening a fake account in my name?" She hesitated. "I used your name because the deed was supposed to be a surprise. I didn't want anything tied back to Ryan until it was ready. It was a gift." "You bought a gift and put it in your name," I said coldly. "You furnished it for your own family, paid for it with money that was meant to pay for my medication." Her mask cracked. A little. "My parents were losing their home," she snapped. "My father's a veteran. My mom has arthritis so bad that she can't stand up some days. What was I supposed to do? Let them end up on the street." "So you chose me," I said, voice quiet but steady. "The one person who would never fight back. The mother-in-law you pretended to care about." "I did care," she shot back. "You don't understand. I thought if I just kept it together long enough I could fix it. Pay it back. Set things right." 2 years, Claire," I said, eyes locked on hers. "You had 2 years." And in those 2 years she'd sat across from me at holidays. She'd eaten food I skipped meals to afford. She'd handed me dollar store candles and called it thoughtful while she slept under high thread count sheets bought with my name. "You forged my signature," I said. "You committed identity theft. That's not love, that's calculation." Her voice dropped. It wasn't supposed to be this big. And there it was. The truth, small, cowardly, hiding behind everything she had constructed. "That's the thing with lies," I said. "They never stay small." Ryan arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't knock either. He walked in, looked at the two of us, and sat down across from his wife without a word. Claire swallowed. "Ryan, You said you loved her," he interrupted. "You said you admired her strength, that you wanted to be close to my family." "I did. You loved her so much, you took everything meant for her and signed her name to it." She looked at him like a drowning woman spotting a lifeboat she knew she no longer deserved. "You have no idea what it's like to watch your parents slip into debt," she whispered, "to feel helpless." "I watched my mother walk to work on a swollen knee," Ryan said. "I watched her pretend not to wince. I thought she was choosing to be frugal. I didn't know she was rationing blood pressure pills." He reached into his coat and pulled out the receipts, the ones that showed gas station withdrawals in states my feet had never touched. The ones that proved she had used my name to order furniture, landscaping brunches, spa visits, all documented in neat little lines of betrayal. "These don't lie," he said. "They don't cry. They don't beg. They don't wear pearls and say, 'Oops.'" Claire covered her face with her hands. But I didn't comfort her. I didn't reach out. Because she didn't get to cry in my house on my couch about the hole she dug beneath my life and hoped I'd never notice. "I'm not pressing charges," I said flatly. Ryan turned to me startled, yet I clarified, "Because I want to know everything first." That night after Claire left, shaken, pale-hollowed Ryan and I sat together in the silence she left behind. "She'll lawyer up," he said. "Let her," I replied. "We've got more than paperwork. We've got intent." And intent was everything. She hadn't just moved funds. She planned, manipulated, constructed alibis, and silenced suspicion. But her biggest mistake? She assumed I'd stay quiet. Later that week, we uncovered more. Ryan's assistant found emails that Claire had sent posing as me, thanking her for handling everything so I don't have to deal with bills. She even attached a fake signature at the bottom. One file even had a scanned letter in my name, requesting that Ryan keep this arrangement private so I could enjoy the gift without guilt. The handwriting wasn't close, it was almost laughable. But it had been enough. Enough to fool him, enough to cut me out with a smile and a pat on the hand. What hurt most wasn't the money. It was the way she'd written me out of my own story. The house was supposed to be a sanctuary, a gift born from Ryan's love, a place to heal and rest. Instead, it became a monument to everything I wasn't told. But that was about to change. Because now I wasn't on the sidelines. And the woman behind the signature, she was about to meet the woman who owns the name. The lawyer's office smelled like lemon polish and unspoken damage. David Kramer had been Ryan's go-to for over a decade, clean-cut, methodical calm, in a way that made even bad news feel like part of a strategy. But that day when he opened the folder Ryan handed him, his eyebrows lifted by a full centimeter. That was his version of a gasp. "This isn't petty theft," he said. "This is full-scale fraud." I sat quietly in the corner, hands folded in my lap, watching, listening. Not out of weakness, but out of intent. The kind of quiet that comes right before the weather breaks. There's a forged deed here. At least 3 false power of attorney documents. Bank accounts in your name, Mrs. Davis. Credit lines, tax filings, business registration using your identity. "She built a world with my name," I said softly. David looked at me, looked for the first time. "We're going to dismantle that world." It started with the affidavit. David dictated. Ryan transcribed. I recounted. Step by step, we reconstructed the timeline. When Claire began helping, when the accounts started appearing, the moments she isolated me from mail, from statements, from access. She hadn't just used my name. She had curated my silence. "We'll begin with a civil suit," David said, tapping his pen against the desk. "That allows us to freeze her assets, including anything she purchased with funds under your identity." "The cottage?" Ryan asked. "If it's in Mrs. Davis's name," David said. Turning to me, "You can change the locks tonight if you want. It's your legal property." "I don't want a dramatic scene," I said. "I want precision. A clean line drawn in the dirt." That afternoon, we drove back to Cypress Key. But not to knock on doors. Not to confront. We met with the county recorder, submitted the fraud report, and notarized the affidavit. I watched as the clerk's pen glided across the line, verified claim of identity theft, owner requests full title lock. In that moment, something subtle shifted in me. It wasn't revenge, not satisfied. It was a restoration. A piece of myself had been reclaimed, not just the asset, but the narrative. I wasn't someone waiting to be rescued. I was the storm walking toward her, justice umbrella in hand, boots laced, file folder under one arm. 3 days later, Claire called Ryan. I was in the kitchen when the phone lit up. He looked at me. I nodded. "Claire," he said. A pause. Then her voice, brittle, practiced, riding the edge of tears. "Ryan, can we talk? Please, I think I made some mistakes. You committed felonies. Another pause. Okay. Can we not use that word yet? It's not a word. It's what you did. She went quiet. Then, my parents have nowhere to go. They had somewhere to go, he said coldly. For 2 years. A home they thought I gave them. But it was stolen. They didn't know. That's not the point. He hung up. That evening I changed the locks on the cottage. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. The sheriff's deputy stood nearby as I slid the new key into the door and turned the bolt. The cottage opened like a stranger, still hers in scent and echo, but mine finally in truth. There were photos on the mantel, her parents, her brother's kids. None of me, not a single frame. I could have been anyone. I stood in the center of the living room and whispered, "You erased me, but I'm still here." And then I boxed everything she left behind neatly, respectfully, methodically. Because justice doesn't have to look like vengeance. Sometimes it just looks like boundaries. Later that week, we received the official notice from the IRS. Mrs. Davis, the letter read, "Due to discrepancies in filings under your Social Security number, you are now listed as the subject of an identity fraud case. Your tax record is being corrected. No further action is required on your part at this time." I didn't cry when I read it, but I did fold the letter neatly, place it in a plastic sleeve, and slip it into the front of my new binder labeled, "My name, my life, my terms." David, our lawyer, advised us to issue a formal request for restitution itemizing every dollar Claire had funneled through fake accounts. "It's north of $82,000, he said, not including damages, possibly more once we calculate compounded tax penalties. I stared at the number. 82,000. That was nearly 5 years of my old salary. I spent 5 years scrubbing tile floors with aching joints, thinking that dignity meant never asking for more than I was given. Now I realize dignity means not letting anyone take what was never theirs. Claire's family was served notice to vacate. Her parents didn't protest. Her mother left a handwritten note on the counter. "We didn't know. We're sorry. We truly thought Ryan had given us the house." I read it twice. And I believed her. Because that's how deep Claire's lie had gone. Not just theft, but illusion. She played benefactor with someone else's generosity. The next twist came quietly. A call from David. "Claire is attempting to file for bankruptcy," he said. Chapter 13. It won't release her from identity theft restitution. But it's a delay tactic. "Let her file," I said. "We'll wait." Because I wasn't rushing anymore. The truth was already working its way through the system like roots cracking pavement. All I had to do was stand still and let it grow. And then the unexpected. Ryan knocked on my door late Sunday holding an envelope. Inside was a letter from Claire, handwritten. No stamps, no signature. Just 5 pages of half explanations, half apologies. Lines like, "I didn't think you'd notice. I just wanted to fix things for my family. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought I'd make it up somehow." I read every word, and then I burned the letter in a ceramic bowl on my porch. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't require conversation, just closure. I didn't plan to tell anyone, not the neighbors, not the women from Sunday Bible study, not even the cashier at Porter's Market who always called me sweetheart and asked if I wanted help carrying groceries. But secrets like damp wood don't stay silent forever. They swell, they creak. And one day someone leans on them the wrong way and everything splinters. It happened on a Thursday. I was at the small brick library tucked behind the old courthouse, the kind that smelled like dust paperbacks and last year's coffee. I had come in to use the public computer not to scroll but to search. Quietly, carefully. I typed the phrase, "financial abuse by family member." I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe a name for what had happened to me. Maybe just someone else who had been through it. That's when I heard it. 2 women are whispering at the front desk, flipping through newspapers. "Did you hear about the Davis thing? The lake house lady? No, the cottage? The daughter-in-law stole it. Forged the whole thing." I froze, one hand still resting on the mouse. I wasn't angry, not even embarrassed. I was still, like air right before a thunderclap. The librarian, sweet Ellen, who always tucked a bookmark into my checkout pile, looked up and caught my eye. Her face flushed. Her lips parted as if she might say something but didn't. I stood, walked slowly toward them. And in the most even voice I could manage, I said, "It's true. I'm Margaret Davis. And yes, my identity was stolen. My house, my income, my trust. But I'm taking it back." No one gasped. No one moved. The silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent, the kind that falls when something unspoken finally lands. That night, I sat on the front porch, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, and thought about all the times I had chosen silence over discomfort. When Ryan forgot Mother's Day during his second year of law school, I told myself he was busy. When Claire smiled too sweetly while I wrapped up leftovers on Thanksgiving, I swallowed the unease. When the first check didn't come, or the second, I convinced myself I must have misunderstood. Because silence was easier than confrontation. Because dignity for women like me was often confused with politeness. But silence has a cost. And I had paid in dignity in groceries, skipped in medication halved. The next morning, the pastor's wife called. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I heard, are you okay?" "I'm not sure yet," I said truthfully. "But I'm awake now." She was quiet for a beat. Then I always thought Claire smiled too much when nothing was funny. That made me laugh, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the knowing alone. Word spread like creek water, slow, inevitable, and everywhere. Some people brought casseroles. Others brought questions they didn't quite know how to ask. But the ones who mattered looked me in the eye. They didn't see pity. They saw strength. Mrs. Henderson, my old supervisor from the cleaning company, showed up unannounced one morning with a mason jar of dahlias and a short hug. "If you ever need a shift, Margaret, we'd take you back in a heartbeat. You always showed up." "Thank you," I said. "But I think I'm finally working for myself now." "That's good," she smiled. "It's about time someone did." But not everyone was kind. At the pharmacy, I overheard a man mutter under his breath, "She's lucky. Most people never get a cent back." As if restitution were a prize. As if $82,000 could erase 2 winters spent wrapped in a thrift store coat with the heat turned down to 58. I didn't correct him. I didn't explain. Because there are people in this world who mistake survival for fortune. Then a letter arrived. No return address. Slanted familiar handwriting. Claire's mother. "Dear Margaret, I don't expect you to forgive me or my daughter, but I want you to know I truly believe the house was a gift. Claire told us it was from Ryan, that it was your idea. We were overwhelmed. We thought it was kindness. I see now it was theft. We didn't question it because we didn't want to. I'm sorry for what that silence cost you. It wasn't an apology, it was an admission. And somehow that mattered more." That night I walked through every room of the cottage, slowly, without shoes, listening to the creaks in the floorboards like old friends I hadn't spoken to in a while. I pulled down the curtains Claire had hung pale gray linen with stitched hems and packed them into a donation box. I opened windows and let the lake wind carry out every trace of her perfume. I didn't repaint. Not yet. I needed space, not renovation. A story of my own, not one I'd inherited from a lie. I started journaling again, quietly, late at night. Not because I needed to vent, but because I wanted a place where every word belonged to me. Page 1 said I used to think being quiet was grace. Now I know sometimes it's surrender. 3 days later, a reporter named Helen Stratton called. "Ms. Davis," she said, "would you consider telling your story for our weekend series? It's called Community Resilience. Only if I don't have to name numbers." "That's fine," she said. "But people should know sometimes identity theft wears pearls and bakes banana bread." I smiled, then said yes. That Saturday, My photo appeared on page 3 of the county newspaper, me holding pruning shears, surrounded by fresh bloomed roses. Headline: She stole more than money. She stole my silence. After that, everything changed. Women I didn't know began stopping me at the co-op. Thank you, one whispered, for saying it out loud. My daughter-in-law hasn't let me into their house since Christmas, said another. I haven't seen my checkbook in 6 years, said a third. One woman left a homemade pie on my porch. No note, just a ribbon and a tag that read, "For the quiet ones who are finally done being quiet." Ryan started coming by more often, not to fix things, just to sit. We watched the birds together. He asked about my childhood. He told me things Claire had once told him, stories about me twisted and sterilized. She said you didn't like visitors. She said you insisted on handling your bills yourself. She said you'd refuse the house. That made you uncomfortable. I listened. Then I said the thing I hadn't been able to admit before: Claire didn't just steal from me. She stole me from you. He looked like he'd been slapped. And maybe he had. Not by me, by the truth. A week later, while cleaning out the hallway drawer, I found a folder labeled Legacy. Inside were 2 sets of documents. One I recognized, my husband's original will. The other looked identical. Until it wasn't. A second will, amended, retyped, signed, notarized. But this one included a clause I had never seen: a family trust naming Claire as a financial advisor with limited oversight of Ryan's inheritance should I become incapacitated. I read it twice. Then again, my fingertips went cold. It was dated 8 months after my husband's stroke, and it listed Claire as the witness. I sat down on the hallway floor and felt something inside me crack, not from grief, but from recognition. She had reached deeper than I thought, not just into my finances, but into my marriage, my grief, my husband's final words. When Ryan came over, I showed him the documents. He stared, then said quietly, "She had access to my dad's home office. She also had access to our pain," I replied. That night I rewrote my journal entry. Being quiet doesn't protect you. It just gives thieves time to build a second story. Because now it wasn't just about what Claire stole. It was about what she rewrote. And I intended to take back every single word. I didn't cry when I saw the forged will. I didn't scream or break plates or call a lawyer in a fit of rage. I sat on the hallway floor for nearly 20 minutes staring at the fine print. And for the first time since the courtroom, I felt something colder than betrayal: displacement. Not just of property, but of memory, of my husband's final acts of love, the way he had reached for my hand in the hospital, his fingers barely strong enough to squeeze, in the way he whispered through the fog of morphine, "Everything I have is yours, Margaret. Always." Now here was a document neatly typed, notarized and filed that said otherwise. It gave temporary fiduciary access to Claire. It cited increasing health vulnerabilities. It called my grief a liability. It did not bear my husband's voice, but it bore his signature, or rather something pretending to be. When Ryan arrived that evening, I didn't meet him at the door. I waited in the dining room, the file folder open in front of me. He walked in cheerful from a morning-run sweat on his collarbone. I didn't look up. "She didn't just steal from the present," I said. "She reached into the past, into Dad's last wishes, and rewrote them." He froze. I handed him the second will. He read in silence. His jaw tightened with every paragraph. By the time he reached the witness signature line, he whispered, "Claire, she witnessed this herself." "Yes. But this was filed after Dad lost verbal function." I nodded. "Then it's not just fraud," he said. "It's exploitation of a vulnerable adult." I stood and walked to the window. She forged a future that was never hers, on paper, in our memories. That night, neither of us slept. We sat on the porch watching the lake shift under moonlight while Ryan scrolled through legal documents on his phone. "I remember Dad dictating his will to his attorney," he said softly. He said he wanted it airtight so no one could touch it. Your father may have planned for death, I said, but he didn't plan for deceit. The next morning we met with Mr. Coltrane, the estate attorney who had handled my husband's affairs. He was older now, thinner, slower, but when he saw the second will, his lips pressed into a tight, trembling line. This, he said slowly, is not the document I filed with probate. Can you prove that? Ryan asked. Coltrane nodded. He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a bound ledger, yellowed but meticulous. Here is your father's signature from 2 years before his stroke. And here, he opened another envelope, is what I filed. Notice the date, the witness, the clause structure. Ryan compared the two. The fake will, the one Claire had submitted, included provisions never discussed. It shifted inheritance assets into a management trust with Claire's name attached as an interim agent in the event of incapacitation. I felt like I was breathing underwater. Coltrane leaned back in his chair. You'll need a forensic document analyst. We'll get one, Ryan said firmly. For the next 2 weeks, the cottage became a war room. Boxes of estate records, financial statements, old letters from my husband. Every scrap of truth was hauled into daylight. And in that process, as each layer was peeled back, I stopped feeling like a widow and started feeling like a witness. Claire's manipulation hadn't started with the money. It had started with kindness. She brought me tea, asked questions about my health, offered to help me declutter the office after the funeral. Now I remembered her smile as she carefully boxed up my husband's records. To give you peace, she said, and I had believed her. She hadn't been helping. She had been harvesting. One afternoon, Ryan returned from a meeting with the forensic analyst. He was pale. They compared the signature, he said. And it's not Dad's. The expert confirmed that the signature on the second will showed signs of mechanical replication. Slight tremors were missing. Ink pressure was even. It matched an older signature. Exactly. A scanned copy, I whispered. Pasted onto a new document. Ryan nodded. She didn't just forge his wishes. She Xeroxed his soul. We contacted the district attorney, because now it wasn't just civil fraud. It was criminal impersonation of a deceased person, identity theft across death itself. The DA assigned a white-collar crimes investigator. Ryan and I sat down side by side as he read through the file. When he finished, he said simply, "You were methodically erased, Mrs. Davis. But you noticed. That matters." Claire, meanwhile, had no idea. She was still living with her parents in Arizona, out on bail. She had no clue that a second case far more serious was forming beneath her. But I wasn't interested in watching her suffer. I was interested in reclaiming everything she had tried to rewrite. That week I went to my husband's grave. It was the first time in months. I brought wildflowers, not lilies. He never liked those. I knelt, brushed dirt off the headstone, whispered, "She tried to speak for you. But I'm louder now." A breeze lifted the edge of my scarf. The lake shimmered in the distance. I wasn't visiting the dead. I was gathering truth from the ground up. We filed the motion to invalidate the second will. We presented the forensic report, the attorney's original records, and the witness mismatch. And in court under oath, I spoke clearly. My husband trusted his family. He didn't know one of them was studying his signature while pretending to grieve. The judge listened. Claire's defense attorney stammered. The forged will was declared null. And then unexpectedly, the court froze all trust assets pending criminal review. Claire called the next night. Blocked number. But I answered. "Margaret, please. I didn't know it would go this far." "Didn't you?" I asked. "It was one document. I just wanted to protect Ryan's inheritance from what you were becoming." What was I becoming? Silence. A woman you couldn't control. "You're making this ugly," she said. "No, you made it false. I'm just calling it what it is." Then I hung up. That night I opened my journal and wrote, "Forgiveness is not an apology someone else earns. It's a decision I make to stop carrying what was never mine." And with that, I set the pen down. Because tomorrow I will begin drafting something else. My own will. This time no one else would write it for me. Claire's voice lingered in the air long after I hung up. Please don't let them arrest me. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a real plea. It was desperation cloaked in entitlement. The kind of tone that expects the world to soften because the speaker is crying. I stared at the phone for a long time. The screen had gone dark, but my pulse hadn't. She'd stolen from my bank account, forged legal documents, and impersonated a dying man. But what rattled me most, she still thought she could talk her way back. The next morning, Ryan knocked on my door before sunrise. His hair was damp, eyes were tired. He held a folder in one hand and coffee in the other. I need to show you something. We sat at the kitchen table. The air between us felt heavier now, like we'd both aged through a war we never wanted. He opened the folder and slid out 2 photographs. One was a document. The other was Claire from 5 years ago before the wedding standing beside his father's desk. Dad kept a lockbox in that drawer, Ryan said. The one in the photo. His originals. Yes. Will. Bank info. Power of attorney. Claire offered to help me scan things after the funeral. I didn't watch closely. I traced the photo with my fingers. The timestamp in the corner made my throat tighten. 3 weeks after the funeral. 2 weeks before the first bank change. She hadn't even waited for the headstone to settle. That same day I received an unexpected visitor, Claire's younger brother Tyler. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in months, thin, nervous, holding his baseball cap in both hands like a prayer. Mrs. Davis, he said, eyes cast downward. I wanted to apologize. For everything. You didn't forge anything, I replied. No, but I lived in that house, the lake house, ate the food, used the heat you paid for. Because you believed her. He nodded. I did. And that's what's killing me now. I let myself believe it because it felt good. She said you didn't want the place, that Ryan had insisted. She said it with so much confidence we never asked more. Confidence isn't truth, I said. It's just performance with good posture. He blinked, then sat uninvited but welcome. My parents are moving, he said, to Idaho. My dad can't bear the whispers anymore. They never knew what she was doing, not really. But still, we lived off your life. That's not easy to forgive ourselves for. Then don't try to forgive it yet, I said. Just don't forget it. He stood, hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. A key. Claire left this in my car last week, said it was too much to carry. I figured you should have it. He placed the key gently on my table and left. I stared at it. Old brass with a faded label in Claire's handwriting. M Storage Unit 27. That afternoon, Ryan and I drove to the address, a dusty lot just outside town, behind a tire shop and across from a shuttered diner. Unit 27. When the door creaked open, dust particles danced in the sunlight like secrets. Inside, bins, labeled files, a garment bag, a box of handwritten notes. And beneath it all, a fireproof safe. Ryan's jaw tensed. He turned to me. Do you want to open it? No, I said. I want to remember this moment. Why? Because it's the last time I'll ever wonder what she's still hiding. Inside the safe, we found more than documents. We found receipts for expensive meals Claire never told Ryan about. Luxury purchases are billed under fake company names. Letters she wrote but never sent complaints about how Ryan had no ambition despite being a partner at his firm. But worst of all, copies of my medical records. Claire had accessed my health insurance portal, downloaded doctor summaries. She'd printed them, annotated them, even highlighted notes like, BP issue could be leveraged. She was building a case to declare me legally incompetent. I walked out of the unit and vomited in the parking lot. When I could breathe again, I whispered, she didn't just want my money, she wanted my identity erased legally. That night, the DA called. The second fraud case had been accepted. Charges would be added: forgery, identity theft, elder exploitation, fraudulent medical declaration. Claire's lawyer reached out with a plea deal: 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, full restitution. Do you want to contest it? Ryan asked. I shook my head. I don't need her to suffer more. I just need her to stop. On the day of her sentencing, I wore navy, not black. I didn't want to look like a mourner. Claire entered the courtroom with her hair pulled back and a pale suit that didn't fit. Her wrists trembled. She glanced at me once. Just once. No nod. No smile. Just the tight look of someone who still believed somewhere deep down that the world owed her kindness. She was sentenced. No one clapped. No one wept. The gavel dropped like a closing door. Afterwards, Ryan and I sat on a bench outside the courthouse. He turned to me. Do you feel better? No, I said. But I feel done. And sometimes that's more powerful. 3 weeks later, I received a letter. From Claire. Postmarked from county jail. The handwriting was softer, slanted, as if she had finally run out of angles. Margaret. I know you don't owe me anything, but I want you to know I never meant to destroy you. I was scared. Drowning in shame, I couldn't admit it. Your strength, your dignity made me feel small, so I tried to shrink you to my level. I see that now. I'm sorry. I folded the letter neatly and slid it into a drawer I don't open often, because apologies mean little unless followed by real change, and I'd stopped confusing confession with accountability. One morning, sitting on the screened porch, I began writing again. Not in my journal this time, but a letter. To the next woman like me, the invisible one, the one who waits for someone else to speak first, the one who tells herself, maybe I misunderstood while her light gets dimmer. You are not crazy, you are not ungrateful, you are not imagining it. If something feels wrong, it is. And if someone tries to rewrite your life, write it louder. I signed the letter and saved it to my desktop. It didn't matter if anyone read it. What mattered was that it existed proof that I was no longer quiet. I used to think signatures were just a formality, a swirl of ink at the bottom of something no one reads. But when you've had your name stolen, your very identity penciled over by someone else's ambition, you learn to look at a signature the way an archaeologist might study bones. It's not just a name, it's evidence, it's intent. And in my case, it became a weapon, not one I wielded in anger, but one I reclaimed with resolve. 3 weeks after Claire's sentencing, Ryan handed me a manila envelope with a gold clasp and a post-it on top, Mom. This is the last one. Your name, your terms. It was the new deed to the lake house. In my name, under my conditions, free of encumbrance, free of fraud, free of Claire. I sat with it for a while before signing. Not because I hesitated, I didn't, but because I wanted to remember how it felt to choose something with both eyes open, with no one watching over my shoulder, no one rerouting my decisions behind my back. I signed with the looped M I've used since I was 16, the same one Claire forgot to copy correctly when she forged my name. And I said it aloud as the pen met paper. This is mine. The process of finalizing the estate took longer than expected. The IRS had frozen assets tied to Claire's fraudulent filings, and untangling which funds belonged to whom required weeks of forensic accounting. But for the first time, I wasn't overwhelmed. I wasn't waiting for rescue. I met with the legal team, reviewed every document, and asked every question. I had spent a lifetime being polite in the face of complexity. Now I was precise. Mr. Patterson, our lead attorney, told me something during our third meeting that stuck with me. Margaret, most people crumble under this kind of violation. They want closure, not clarity. But you want to see everything. Because closure without truth, I replied, is just denial in a pretty dress. Meanwhile, Ryan began restoring the office in the lake house, the same room Claire once used to store fake invoices and altered records. He repainted the walls, removed the cabinet she'd installed, ordered a new desk. One afternoon, I walked in to find him arranging my old photo albums on a shelf. I thought you might want some of this back where it belongs, he said. I sat in the armchair, touched the spine of our wedding album, then flipped it open. There we were, young, sunburned from our honeymoon, laughing at something I no longer remembered. "You look like you trusted the world," Ryan said. "I did," I replied. "And it trusted me back. Until it didn't." Not long after that, I received a call from the county clerk's office. A woman named Lila. She said someone had attempted to file an addendum to my late husband's estate anonymously back in the early days of the probate process. But the submission had been flagged and rejected for lack of verification. "We keep logs of all failed attempts," she explained. "Your name came up during a system audit and I thought you should know. Do you still have the documents?" I asked. "Yes. May I come see them?" Of course. The folder they handed me was slim, maybe 10 pages, but every line dripped with presumption. The addendum claimed my husband had intended to move a portion of our joint assets into a family-managed trust to ensure Margaret's medical needs wouldn't become a financial burden on the estate. There it was again, the soft, civilized knife of Claire's logic, wrapped in legality, sharpened with condescension. Burden. That word echoed through me like a slap. On the drive home, I pulled over just outside town. There's a little overlook near the cemetery where the trees thin out and the lake glints through like stained glass. I sat there for nearly an hour, letting that word swirl and settle. I wasn't a burden. I was someone's wife. I was someone's mother. I was someone. And someone tried to rewrite that into a problem to be solved. That night, I sat across from Ryan at the dining table. He was reviewing financial statements. I was holding the clerk's folder. "Did Dad ever say anything even once that made you think he worried I'd become a burden?" "No. Never. In fact," he hesitated. "He used to say the opposite. That he was lucky you stayed. That you made everything else possible." I nodded. I just needed to hear it again. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The next morning, I took all of Claire's forged documents, every addendum, every false signature, every rewritten clause, and I burned them. Not as vengeance, but as a declaration. This chapter was over. The fire was small, controlled, and contained in the fire pit behind the house. But the flame was real. I watched her version of my life curl and blacken into nothing. And for the first time in years, I breathed without caution. It's strange how justice feels, not like triumph, not like a celebration, but like breath, uninterrupted, unconditional, unstolen. A week later, the restitution came through. $94,700 more than I had ever held in my entire life. Ryan sat with me while I opened the certified envelope. He didn't say a word, just watched as I counted not just the money, but every insult, every indignity, every frozen night in that old apartment being undone one document at a time. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked gently. I thought about it. Then I said, "Live." But I didn't buy a new car, or remodel the kitchen, or travel anywhere with postcard sunsets. I bought a new water heater, a sturdy reading chair, and 3 years' worth of blood pressure medication. Then I made a call to my old friend Della, the pastor's wife, and asked if she'd help me start something. "A fund," I said, "for women like me, who fall through the cracks not because they're weak, but because someone else was clever and cruel." She paused, then said, "Margaret, that's the most dangerous combination I know, women with wisdom, money, and a reason." We called it the Second Signature Fund, for women who'd been rewritten, and who wanted their pen back. Now every Tuesday morning I sit at the local community center with a cup of coffee and a stack of applications. Some are heartbreaking, some are infuriating, all are familiar. And when I approve a grant, I don't think about justice in the legal sense. I think about reclamation. Claire's sentence ends next spring. She'll be eligible for early release with good behavior. I don't think about it often. But sometimes when the wind shifts or an old song comes on the radio, I remember the way she used to laugh at the dinner table, head tilted just slightly, eyes on Ryan, like he was a prize to be maintained. She never loved him. Not really. She loved what he represented. And when I look back now, I realize I was never the main obstacle. I was just the first one to notice. I don't hate her. I don't pray for her either. I simply hope the next time she picks up a pen, it's to write something honest, maybe even for herself. Because when your life depends on forgery eventually, you run out of pages. As for me, I signed the last of the paperwork last Thursday. The lake house is mine outright. The fund is operational, my health is steady, my son is present. And every morning before the sun hits the windows, I walk the gravel path down to the edge of the lake and whisper one thing into the fog. I remember who I am now. And that's the signature that freed me. It's been a year. 12 quiet months since the gavel dropped and the silence lifted. 12 months of learning how to live in a house that used to be a crime scene and letting it become a sanctuary. 12 months of watching the seasons change over the lake and realizing for the first time in decades I wasn't surviving anymore. I was choosing. The day the final restitution payment cleared, I bought something for myself. Not jewelry, not a trip, not even new clothes. I bought a wind chime, copper and glass. I hung it by the back porch, the one Claire once suggested we replace with something modern. Now it sings when the breeze comes through. Not loud, just enough to remind me the world still moves gently even after chaos. And maybe that's the lesson I didn't know I needed, that you can rebuild without rushing. You can heal without forgetting. You can be soft without ever being silent again. Last week, a woman named Elsie showed up to our second signature meeting. She was in her 70s, wrinkled hands, eyes like steel. She'd been conned by her niece not for money but for power of attorney. She told the doctor I couldn't remember dates, Elsie said. But I can still quote Emily Dickinson by heart. Everyone laughed gently, but the fire in her was real. So what did you do? I asked. She lifted her chin. I called a lawyer. I came here. And now I'm moving back into my own damn house. The room clapped, because we knew what that meant. I don't think I ever wanted revenge. Not really. What I wanted was the right to narrate my own life, to have my pain acknowledged, not questioned, to matter without needing to justify it. Some days I still feel the old tugs, the urge to apologize before I speak, the reflex to shrink to accommodate, the habit of doubting my memory, my instincts, my worth. But now, when those feelings rise, I do something simple. I speak my name out loud, Margaret Davis, and I remember that every word that follows is mine to choose. As I sit here on this screened porch watching the last light of day fold into the water, I think about you, the person listening to this. You might be someone who gave too much grace for too long. You might have kept quiet to keep the peace only to realize it cost you your voice. You might still be waiting for someone else to do the right thing. Let me say this as clearly as I can. You don't need permission to reclaim your life. You don't need a courtroom to prove your truth. You don't need to stay small so others can stay comfortable. If you've been rewritten, you have every right to take the pen back and start again. I've learned that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about giving yourself a future that wasn't stolen. It's about turning the signature they forged into the one you proudly write at the end of your own story. Not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as the author. So now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had your trust broken not by a stranger, but by someone you loved? Have you ever stayed quiet when everything inside you screamed to speak? Drop your story in the comments. Or just say, I'm taking the pen back. I read every single one. And if this story made you feel seen even for a moment, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who might be writing their comeback. Because somewhere out there, another woman is still waiting to be believed, and your story might be the permission she didn't know she was waiting for. Thank you for listening. This was the story of Margaret Davis, the woman who was erased but rewrote her ending. And now, maybe it's your turn.